Hola, muy buenos días a todos. Soy Nicole Martínez y es un gusto para mí estar el día de hoy con ustedes en la comunidad de aprendizaje y conocimiento e innovación de Exposible por Subsidio. Recuerden que cada jueves nos reunimos de 8 a 9 de la mañana para compartir diversos temas en torno a la innovación y la gestión empresarial, como metodologías, nuevas tecnologías, tendencias, casos de éxito que impulsan la innovación y la gestión empresarial. También promovemos mucho las perspectivas globales. Y pues como saben, los invito también a que compartan todas sus preguntas al finalizar la sesión. Daremos unos 5 minutos para poder hacer todas aquellas preguntas que ustedes tengan y darles una respuesta. En un momento van a encontrar los diferentes enlaces de Zoom, Teams, YouTube, para que puedan compartirlos con todas aquellas personas que les resulte de interés esta conversación y puedan conectarse. Hoy tendremos una sesión en inglés, así que ustedes van a poder seleccionar el idioma que ustedes prefieran, ya sea inglés o español. Para esto tenemos un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Ustedes lo seleccionan, es un globo, y ahí ustedes van a poder elegir el idioma de preferencia. Y bueno, sin más preámbulos, quiero darle la bienvenida a Frank Mates. Él es fundador y CEO de Lean Skill Lab. Y Frank nos va a contar desde Alemania cómo la innovación suele fallar dentro de las organizaciones y nos va a compartir también 3 condiciones que nos permiten innovar de manera eficiente para que esto funcione, como lo es el liderazgo, los procesos, la cultura, y toda esta información nos ayuda a generar valor dentro de la organización para poder ejecutar la innovación y dar resultados reales. Así que, Frank, te invito a prender tu cámara, tu micrófono, a presentarte, queremos conocer más sobre ti y pues ya puedes iniciar la sesión.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thanks for having me here, dear community. Sound is good? You can hear me well? Can I have a thumbs up? Okay, super, super. Okay, I prepared a couple of slides to make it more interesting, visually appealing. So let me fire up these slides and then we get started. One of the slides is some words about me, only one slide. The majority of those 10 or 12 that I prepared, and then hoping to get some questions from your side. Some challenges maybe as well, is then off charts. So the company that I founded and that I run, it's called Lean Scale Up. So it's an extension of the Lean Startup. The Lean Startup was originally designed, as you may know, for greenfield startups, right? Some people that say, we have a brilliant idea and we want to create products and a company from that, right? And turns out that the Lean Startup has some elements that are relevant for companies as well. but it's not good enough, right? We need to think broader, and we need to think longer, meaning into scaling up, and we need to think in the corporate context. And this is what lean scale up is about. What you see in the subtitle, Now and New, how companies can create new growth by scaling innovation and generating new businesses. That's the title and the subtitle of my latest book. And that interface between the now, the existing business, and the business as usual, if you may call it that way, in the daily operations that also not-for-profit organizations have, and the new, the things that go beyond that. How can we design that interface so that brilliant ideas become significant new businesses or significant new operations? That's what I've been working on in the last 7 or 8 years of my life. And Nicole reached out to me and say, Frank, why don't you want to share how to make innovation work inside established organizations? I said, well, that's what I love to do, because that's what I've burned for, and that's my passion. And well, here we are. One slide about me. So some month ago, I asked ChatGPT to create an image of how ChatGPT sees me. And this is what I got back. It's a corporate innovation action figure. I've been in that space of corporate innovation now altogether some 15, 16 years or so. Now and New is the title of the last book. Lean Scale Up, the framework and the company that I created. And what you see on the lower right, those two little toys, one is red and one is blue. To make discussions easier with my clients, I sometimes use the image, the red shirts and the blue shirts. This comes from, you may have read the book, The Blue Ocean Strategy, where the red shirts, the people working in the red ocean, which is the existing business, right, with defined customers and known competitors, and they try to increase market share and pull in revenues. That's a daily business, the red shirts. And the blue shirts looking for the blue oceans, right? They're things that go beyond that. The main thesis of that book is that many companies are not satisfied with the output that innovation generates, right? It doesn't generate revenues as expected. It doesn't help really to transform. So I hear a lot of voices in my client base, which are companies 500 million plus, predominantly in Europe, right? Interestingly, less in Germany than it's more the rest of Europe. I hear many voices that say, well, that new, meaning the innovation, does not work because it does not scale, right? They have those nice little prototypes, and it's all interesting and good discussions about how the world could look like, but it doesn't turn into something substantial, new. The main thesis is it's the other way around. Innovation does not scale, does not create new revenue streams, because the existing business is not prepared for letting it scale. So the big question that I addressed with more than 100 practitioners. So in fact, it's not only Frank's book, but it's Frank plus 100, or maybe the other way around, 100 plus Frank is, we need to design that interface between the existing business and what should be the new business. Well, there are a lot of people out there who say, Frank, that's a kind of thought leader in that corporate innovation space, and he's really an expert when it becomes how can companies create new businesses in here. And if you ask those AI tools, what's so special about Frank, and that's the last sentence about myself, is Frank is the one when it comes to design that interface between now and new. And what you typically find is that the first steps in innovation, they're quite easy, right? Coming out with a great idea and then building a prototype. These days you use, if it's close to software, you use AI tools, right? You can do that in days. You can do that in weeks. That's not the real problem. But the problem is what comes after that. And that transition to make it big, that transition to scale, this is where many companies struggle, right? And some call it also the valley of death for innovation ideas. And this is where I, together with more than 100 people, created a framework how to survive in the valley of death and create impact from innovation. Let me reframe the title of today's session: how to go beyond business as usual without breaking the system. Right, so we innovators, we are well advised to be very humble, to say there is an existing business that has customers, that has operation, brings in the revenues, generates the money that we innovators need to fund our innovation activities. But the big question is how to proceed in really making that kind of change to create a new. And I'd like to structure my talk for the next 45 minutes or so by looking into 5 points. So first of all, I want to follow me on my observation, supported by the many discussions I had with my 100 co-authors on the book. What is the real tension between the existing business, the now, and the innovation, the new? And explain why it's not so much of an issue about communication and coming up with fancy mission statements and colorful posters. These all do not work. What I want to point you as is number 3. In designing that interface, the main thesis of my book, we need to look at 3 pillars to put in place, right? Nicole already mentioned that. That's leadership, that's finding a right process. And it's about the people side, meaning the culture and the collaboration. And I boiled this down in my speech to 4 aspects per each of the categories. So in other words, if you want to think about it that way, there are 12 dozen success factors to really create success from innovation, to create new businesses or to create corporate change in here. And Nicole also asked me to be very, very practical. So out of that whole theory, which will only be there just to frame the whole thing, I would like to share 5 practical steps to improve. And spoiler alert, this will not be about setting up a big innovation transformation program. These will not work. If you then come back to point 2 on my agenda, these are practical steps, and it's a kind of a very humble but impactful approach. And then to summarize, showing you the journey that we went together, for you to take one idea to take away and basically put it into practice starting then tomorrow. So let's start. When I discuss innovation with my clients coming from different industries, it's very soon, at least in Europe, we zoom in on one point. The point is that the key problem of innovation is not the lack of ideas, is not that we do not have enough smart people. The problem is that 2 systems clash. So let me elaborate on that, and maybe it's a good thing that I start off with one definition of innovation, my definition. I'm not saying that this is the universal or maybe even the best definition. Fun fact, when I published my book last year, I did a little research and looked on Amazon.com, the US side of Amazon, how many books are published every quarter that have innovation in the title, right? And I found 300 books, right? And every one of these 300 books obviously has its own definition of innovation. Even Wikipedia is not quite clear. So there's a lot of fuzz and unclarity about that term. The definition that I like to use is capturing the value from meaningful insights via new offerings. These offerings could be products, could be services, could even be new business models, new processes, etc. So let me just stress 3 points of that. In my view, innovation is about capturing the value. So it's bringing in revenues, it's bringing in euros, dollars, cents, whatever currency we're using, right? From that idea that we originally start with. It's not just getting something out, something new into the market, a novelty, if you will, right? It's really bringing back and having a return on innovation, if you will, on the money, on the people resources spent in here. Capturing the value from meaningful insights. I don't think innovation should start with ideas. I think innovation should start with a deep insight into what's happening outside of the company walls in the world out there. What are the trends? What are the emerging customer expectations, customer needs that we can help solve? Right? I was working with a company that does those bathtubs, etc. And they are saying, well, we were founded 125 years ago when personal hygiene, meaning bathtubs and showers, etc., that was the problem that we solved. But overall, at least in Europe, we consider this problem to be solved. So if we're just looking at this particular problem, there would be no reason for us to be in business anymore. We need to think broader, we need to think wider. There are some things going on. So for instance, water shortage. How can we provide people with personal hygiene using 99% less water? Well, what a concept, isn't it? That's a meaningful insight. And then you start generating the ideas, test the ideas, etc. So that's a strong point that I usually like to make. It should start with meaningful insights. So if we take on just for this 30, 40 minutes, that definition of innovation, that means every company has to do two things at the same time. It needs to run the business, right? Serve the customers, order fulfillment, the procurement parts, the financial controlling, etc. You name it, the product adaptations, small step, incremental improvements, improving the internal processes 1% at a time. That's run the business. That's business as usual. And the second part is change the business. I think that's where we would put that definition of innovation on. Change the business, right? If we could fast forward 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and have a look, we would find that your company is different then, right? Maybe different products, different customer groups, different channels, etc. You name it, right? So that's the change that we need to do. And if you reflect upon it, that's the eternal dilemma at a personal level, at a company level, doing the things that are urgent, doing the things that are short term, while at the same time thinking about the future, preparing and designing for the future. Here comes the problem. The problem comes if you look at the qualities or some key factors of these two poles, if you will, run the business and change the business. The existing business is built on predictability, right? You say we will have X revenues at the end of the year. You communicate to your partners, we'll get the new product out by September 26, right? And obviously, everything that's going on should be very efficient. To ensure that, you have processes. To ensure that you have key performance indicators and metrics that measure everything so that you can easily and quickly tell if you're still on course or if you're going away. It's a short-term focus, right? Because you want to discover deviations early, right? And for good reasons, you want to cut out any risk, anything that disturbs those processes. Now, if we look at the other side, if we look at the change the business side, right? We don't know exactly what customers expect from us 2-3 years down. There's a lot of uncertainty. That means in order to convince ourselves and to make sure that we invest our money wisely, we need to gather evidence, step by step prove that we're on the right course. We need to think longer, and we need to think 2 years, 3 years, maybe even 5 years into the future. And what we're doing is inherently risky. You cannot cut out the risk in what you're doing and exploring the things. So what we're seeing is two systems, run the business and change the business, two different systems that have a completely fundamentally different logic. And the left side, run the business, business as usual, is always dominant, will always win. Why? Because the people at the top, they say, I have to do what matters most, which is securing the revenues. And part of these revenues goes into funding what we see on the right, innovation. So that means the run the business part will always win. So if we stop here, right, there would be no innovation. So we have to think harder. And let me just show you a couple of thoughts, what I learned in the last years, what will not work. Innovation struggles or is facing an uphill battle against the existing business. This is rarely because people are not smart enough. But what you find is that the interface, the connection between the now and the new, between the business as usual and innovation, a little thought has gone in here. It's not designed or it's weak. And what I learned, and that's a deep experience that I want to share with you, maybe even save you a lot of personal trouble, maybe even give you some relaxation in here. You cannot solve that problem between today and tomorrow at a philosophical level. You have to be very tangible and talking about real concrete topics and trends, etc. You cannot win a debate with the existing business, with the senior managers, with the stakeholders of the existing business that innovation is important. They will tell you, yes, it's important. But to translate the translation between that statement and what is actually happening in bringing together innovation and the business usual, there's a huge gap, and you cannot win the debate by philosophical arguments. And no, to disappoint you, this tension between now and new, between today and tomorrow will not go away. It will not become easier. It will not become harder if you do not change. It will always be there. Right? So think about your personal life. If you think about what should I do today and what do I want to have achieved, or what's the house that I want to live in 2-3 years, and how much do I need to save, etc., etc. There will always be the dilemma between now and new. Same at the company level. Beautiful slogans will not change the world, neither will nice PowerPoint slides change the behavior of senior managers and middle managers. We need to think harder. So the way I'd like to frame it is, you cannot simply claim that innovation is important or announce that it must have a top spot in the corporate agenda. You must design for it, meaning in particular the design for that interface between the now and the new, or another picture that I like to use is the bridge between the now and the new. And it turns out, as Nicole already said in the introduction, that you need 3 pillars to be in place, right? And I will look into each pillar, showing you the 4, I guess, essential parts, right? So actually it's a little bit more complex, but I think it's a good starting point. It's about leadership. Balancing now and new, balancing the daily requirements and firefighting the daily crisis, while at the same time spending money, spending time into building something that will materialize in 1.5 years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. That's leadership's job, right? And I will show you in the next slide some 4 concrete measurable points where this manifests, right? Actually, I mean, if you say balancing now and new, running the business while at the same time changing the business, you can even think about that this is leadership job number 1. That's the top spot. That's why these people get their money. It's not just for today, but also for creating the future. Having a look at the process, an end-to-end process that starts with meaningful ideas and ends where you have created something substantial, a new revenue stream, a new service for a not-for-profit organization. That's paramount in bridging the now and the new. And the third one is culture and collaboration. And what I found together with my 100 co-authors is that you need all three of them. So if you have a strong leadership backing, but a weak process and people that are not really collaborating, innovation is symbolic, right? You may have your innovation centers and your hackathons and your meeting with startups, etc. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change the world. It's symbolic. Same if you have a strong process, but not little leadership support and people that support you. You need all three of them. So let's dive deeper. And each of these three pillars, 4 major aspects. So if you will, 12 1 success factors to really make an impact via innovation. Number 1 in the blue is the leadership color in here. Leadership needs to define and put priority on where future growth should come from. So in many companies, you see a lot of confusion about the topic of the day. We should do this, we should do that, right? The senior managers of the company need to align on that this particular area, some call it search field, some call it growth engine, let's call it this area, this is where our future growth should come from. Right, so that's number 1, and putting the skin in the game. Now, skin in the game, you may not know that expression. That's a term that originated from the United States of America somewhere in the 1850s, back when in the Wild West, as it was called then, some trappers shot animals, and when they met in the evening in the saloon for a drink and played their card games, they needed to put something on the table that is of value, right? Back then they had the skin of the animals that they shot then. These days, skin in the game means that leaders, senior managers need to put something on the table that is valuable. It's about money, funding, but I typically find that you always find a little bit of money to run a little more experiments or to create a prototype, etc. So money, in certain boundaries, obviously, is not the real problem. Time of the people, resources, is a much stronger commitment. So if they say, we think that in this area of future growth will come from, they will need to devote teams on them, right? People that work from Monday through Friday, spend their time coming up with great ideas, right? Test those ideas, build prototypes, and then something that will become big using the capabilities of the existing company. The biggest skin of the game is their personal reputation. So I find that in companies where the leadership not only commits to those growth engines, search fields, whatever you'd like to call it, but personally put their reputation on the table to say, I want to make sure that we win in there. I want to see those new products and services, and I put my personal success on the table, right? I associate my personal success with the company being successful in the area. That's when a lot of problems are being solved. To contrast that, if you have a leadership team that leans back and say, well, we did our annual strategy exercise, right? And now innovation team, you please report on a monthly basis what you're doing, etc. And if I find the time, I will read through your reports. It's hard. So that skin in the game concept, that's a powerful concept. What we also need to do is find goals that are relevant for the daily business as well as for the new that we want to create. Typically, you find that the existing business has goals, key performance indicators, metrics that are totally different than the goals, KPIs, and metrics that the innovators use. Now, imagine if we look at the company, we have the senior managers, we have the middle managers, we have the experts, etc., you name it. And if the goals and their activities and the behaviors will always follow the goals that we have, and if the goals of the company are the just the day-to-day business, it becomes hard for the innovators to make their case. And the last point, in the typical company environment, right, you're paid for delivering certainty. So if your boss asks you, when can I get the report and when will you have finished that task, right, they want to hear a definitive answer. Yes, you get it by tomorrow evening. New product will be in the market at that. Yes.
Tenemos un inconveniente técnico.
Okay.
Esperemos un
Thank you.
momento.
Thank you. So, I mean, in a corporate environment, you're basically also paid for delivering that sense of certainty, right? Saying you get the report by tomorrow evening, or the new product will be in the market 2 months time, right? But what we're doing in the innovation space is highly uncertain. We don't know. Is an answer that you hear very often. It's not because people are stupid, but the level of certainty, the level of proof, of evidence that you're looking for, right? That's not predictable. So leadership also needs to be able to think about how to deal with uncertainty. Looking at the second pillar, the process, right? The 4 key elements that I see in here are create meaningful ideas. Meaningful meaning related to something that you say there's a trend out there. More and more customers are asking for this. Or if we follow closely what's happening in other parts of the world, well, in Latin America, most likely in the next 2 to 3 years, we will see that development as well, right? And then you start with ideas. It's always the connection of ideas to what is going outside the company. I was working with a big pharma company, right? Billions of revenues. And they said to me, Frank, to be honest, we discovered that for the first 100 years of our company life, we have been working inside out. We had created great ideas and tried to make great products and billions of revenues out that. We now see that this approach doesn't work anymore, and we need to become more outside in, right? What is happening to the outside? Some things are not relevant for us. Some things are highly relevant for us. How can we create value from what we see outside? The process that we're talking about, a powerful process, has 2 major ideas running at the same time. We build, we see if it works or not, if customers like what we're seeing, if our interviews provide the feedback, the data that we need, and then we learn and then we refine, right? The old idea was we build something and hopefully it will be a success, and hopefully we will find customers. That's not working anymore. That's too time expensive and also too expensive when we think about monies. So it's a more agile, if you will, approach in here. So, and what you invest more and more, right, from the first idea and the first prototype built on cardboard to have some visualization, and then you basically spend a couple of days using AI tools to create a mock-up, a prototype of a software solution that becomes a real product out in the market. You only invest more money and scale it when you see that customers are accepting that, right? And in B2B settings, for instance, accepting would be a contract to participate in a pilot, right? So that these companies, your potential customers, say, we will invest time, we will invest money, we will define a team that works with you and getting this product ready out in the market. If you do not find this kind of confirmation, well, it's questionable if you should scale it. And then the fourth point is, and this is the valley of death that I mentioned earlier, this is where 90+X% of all innovations fail, is how to move beyond the first prototypes and pilots, how to chinch together, how to align with the existing business and scale it, right? And turning into real products that you put into your catalog, that your salespeople will sell to the potential customers and bring in the value, the revenues that are in there. The third pillar, culture and collaboration, again, 4 points, so that leaves us all together with those 12 success factors. Collaboration must be designed. So typically what you find is that the people, the senior manager, the middle manager, etc., in the business as usual, right? They have goals, they have metrics that measure how well they do their job. And then in the typical setting of companies, their goals do not include innovation goals, right? So what's in for me, that's the highest level, and then you have to make sure that innovation is embedded in the thinking models and in the thinking systems, and also maybe in some cases the software systems that drive behavior. And what I found together with these 100 people is that they all have a P and an M in here. So there's performance management systems, there's product management systems, there's process management systems, people management systems, portfolio management systems, etc. And you name it, P and an M. Right? And we need to make sure that innovation is embedded into those systems, that there are goals and metrics in there. Right? When we achieve that, we basically achieve that innovation is embedded into the viewpoints of the senior managers and the middle managers, and then you're set up for success. We need different people profiles. And actually what I found these days in my work is that the key question is how mixed teams between the experts from the existing business and the innovators should be orchestrated. A model that works pretty well is the pilot-co-pilot model. So depending on the innovation, the innovators are in the pilot seat if it's more far away, and the people from the daily business are in the co-pilot seat, or vice versa if it's closer to the existing business. That works very well. In that uncertainty, people need a safe space. Some people speak about psychological safety. And last but not least, I guess innovators are very, very well advised if we take on the viewpoint that innovation should be embedded, not only by these metrics, but also by the work style. Innovation is more than just the innovation unit. In some respect, it's the task of the entire company, right? In practice, you find you need to win the middle managers, right? And aligning them on goals and metrics, as I mentioned earlier, is the key point. So that's a kind of what you will find in the lean scale-up framework, those 12 success factors. Now, Nicole asked me, Frank, please make it very practical. What should our folks, our community do? 5 practical steps that you can apply short term. What I learned in the last 2, 3, 5 years, if you will, 5 years ago, it was about innovation is the great thing, right? And we will change the world, and we're the most innovative company in the industry. These kind of calls out there. And then people spend a lot of time creating a perfect structure so that innovation can work, right? They discussed about processes, and they designed the governance structure and worked out the funding mechanisms, etc. They had a perfect model, I would say, on paper. The problem was it didn't work, right? Because there was the clash between the two systems. So what I learned in the last 2 to 5 years is I was thinking about the question, how can we change that? How can we bring together the day-to-day business and the innovation? And I think the time to come up with a perfect model on paper and then trying to sell it to the organization, that doesn't work anymore, right? People are so busy these days in the day-to-day business, right? And in many companies, you also find a lot of skepticism for innovation, right? It did not work. They did not deliver what they promised, new revenue streams or changing the company. So now they come with that beautifully crafted PowerPoint slide deck again, right? And they want to convince us that this is the way to go, say the people from the day-to-day business. What I learned is what works. I've seen this in many companies, different industries. I've seen it in the construction industry, in the energy industry, in the travel industry, you name it. So for me, it seems to be almost universal that the way to go to change the day-to-day business, to open it up for more innovation, to basically create the fertile ground for innovation impact, is using a humble step-by-step approach. Do not start with redesigning the entire organization. Start with small step pilots, right? One innovation at a time, where you say, well, we think that in order to make this successful, we need a senior manager sponsor, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, right? And we need to work together with the day-to-day business like that. And then you run this project and be very, very mindful, like a scientist, what works and what does not work yet, right? Where's the friction? So that in the next step, you can say, well, we ran this project and we were kind of successful, but we also noticed that there were certain obstacles in the way. Things where life was much harder than it needs to be, right? And then discuss how to remove that particular obstacle. So the way to go, for those of you who read the book, I highly recommend this, is the theory of constraints. You may recall from my beginning that I say, well, two systems clash, right? The day-to-day business system and the innovation system, right? People, metrics, effective behavior, etc. These are all parts of the system. And the theory of constraints, and there's also a brilliant book out there called The Goal, states, well, if you want to optimize a system, or in our case, how two systems work together, you have to resolve the biggest constraint, biggest obstacle, the tightest constraint, right? Because when you resolve that, the whole system will work better, right? And what happens is you then run into the next biggest obstacle, and then you resolve that. And that's how you develop a system, or make the day-to-day business system work together with the innovation system more step by step. You then embed mixed team, the way to work that provides results that I found is innovators meeting with the operative businesses twice per year, every quarter, in a kind of a dialogue. Now, a dialogue is a two-way communication. First part of that communication is that the day-to-day business, the business units, the business lines, tell the innovators, listen, folks, this is our day-to-day business, but on top, we see some things going on in our environment, right? There's new technology. We see that people are asking for additional services. We see that new partners are about to enter in our market, and they have a completely different value proposition. But we're day-to-day business. We do not have the resources. We do not have the people who are trained and skilled in thinking about what that means. Could you innovators help us to prepare for that future? And the second part of the communication is that the innovators tell the business units, the day-to-day business, well, we've been speaking on with startups, we've been present in some conferences, we talk with other companies. Here's what we see is happening. What do you think? Will this be relevant for you as well? So at the end of that process, of that dialogue process, you come up with an aligned and agreed agenda. And the good thing is now that gives you innovators a clear yardstick for success. This is where you can show to the senior management, to the middle managers, etc. This is what we have achieved, right? Because we did what we agreed upon, that shared agenda, shared innovation agenda, and then implement it with clearly defined roles. As I said earlier, pilot, co-pilot is a good model. Define, in particular in the early stages, where there's room for being uncertain, where there's room for seeing which idea will actually win. And no, it's not about the people, but it's about the ideas and what we test out in the market, and only the best ideas will survive. And the last of these 5 practical points is to think already when you start, what could be the end of the journey. So if you're successful, and in the early stages, you would ask very intensively, what would need to be for that idea to be successful? But if you're successful, what would be the end game? The end game could be that you transfer it into an operative business unit, business line. Well, we need to prepare that already from day one. And here's the interesting point, if you look at that middle column, that pilot, co-pilot model. What I learned is in these companies where we have those mixed teams with clearly defined roles, the people from the day-to-day business that are part of the innovation team, right? They have a dual function. The first function is obvious. They bring in their expertise, right? They know the business, they have access to the customers. So if you want to interview the customers, they can give you access, etc., all those things. That's the easy part. In practice, the second function is as important, because these people from the day-to-day business that are part of the innovation team, they also are taking over a big part of stakeholder management, right? They meet their superiors every other week, right? And obviously they will discuss that innovation project and what is going on, taking up the concerns of the senior managers, bringing in their ideas. So you get a lot more bonding between senior managers from the day-to-day business and the innovation units. So what that means, or what my piece of advice for you would be to see, I don't know where you stand exactly on your innovation setup in your company, but pick one of these, right? Maybe think about the next innovation initiative that you start. Do it in a very structured pilot, right? And think about carefully what you want to achieve, how it is embedded into the decision making, how the funding mechanism should work, which people should be on the team, but treat it as an experiment and see what is working. Or, for instance, you say, well, our key focus would be point number 3, right? How can we align with the business unit? So these are practical points that help you to improve how these 2 systems and the day-to-day business as well as the innovation work together. So here's my last slide, kind of summary of the thought process of the journey that we went through. And my request would be pick out one idea, only one, not 6 that you'll see on the screen in a second, right? Take out one idea that resonated most and think about how to implement it in your work practice. So I started off by making the point, innovation, it's not about ideas, right? It's about meaningful ideas, understanding what's going on outside, and to capture the value, or in other words, it's about the impact, measured in revenues, in corporate transformation, in more public service, or in better value for the planet, if you think about in environmental initiative, right, going beyond what is being done today. Then led you through that kind of mental image with the two systems and showed you that these systems do not work together by default. No, we have to design the interface, the conditions between how day-to-day business is running and the things that you want to create. We then went on and say, okay, these conditions, they manifest if we want to build a bridge between these two systems, now and new. It's about leadership, process, and culture. Towards the end, I encouraged you to start small, build and test how to improve the innovation system, but it also applies to the individual innovation. Learn what's working, what is not working, upgrade the system step by step. Do not ask for a big revolution. And last but not least, scale only what works. Make it bigger and bigger, more and more circles inside the company, or scale what works obviously also relates to the individual innovation as you make it bigger and bigger and transfer it to the business unit so that they can take a 5 or 10 million business and turn it into a 50 or 100 million business. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Come back to me if you say, I'm a corporate innovation leader, I want to align the mandate, decision rights, and how to engage with the business unit. Thank you so much for the attention. Looking forward to your questions or challenges. Nicole?
Perfecto, gracias Frank. Vamos a dar inicio entonces a esta sesión de preguntas. Hay varias de las diferentes plataformas. Y aquí Andrea nos está preguntando, ¿qué señales evidencian que una organización está optimizando demasiado el presente y dejando de construir el futuro? Precisamente por eso que nos mencionas de este mundo tan acelerado, de tener que entregar estos resultados de manera urgente.
I mean, if you look at the annual reports from the big consulting companies, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, etc., you find that the big part of senior managers say innovation is an important stuff, right? Yet only 6%, if I recall it correctly, are satisfied with what they get out of that. So dissatisfaction with innovation is one part of a metric where you can measure that things are not working. And depending on your industry, particularly if you look at B2C, consumer industries, or business to business, where you have a broad market, right? A good metric is also how much revenue are generated from relatively new products, typically products in the last 3 markets, right? So are you basically living off the products that have been created some 10, 15, 20 years ago? Or are you still in touch with market needs and where the market is moving? So maybe these two.
Teniendo en cuenta esta respuesta, Frank, como Manuel también nos estaba preguntando, ¿dónde trazas la línea entre mejoramiento continuo e innovación real? ¿Qué cambia en la mentalidad, el riesgo, el trabajo en equipo, la creación de valor?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, I hope that you got from my talk that I'm saying both sides are equally important, right? To run the business and change the business, right? So it's not that one is superior, both of them are equal. If we look at historical figures, you actually see that 70% of the money and the people that somehow go beyond what is currently there, let's call it innovation with a small I, right, goes into product improvements, 20% in what is close by and 10% what is far off. But the question you're asking is superb. And what I found is a quick litmus test that could be applied to say, when are we actually speaking about innovation with a capital I? And when is it more day-to-day business or innovation with a small I, meaning the continuous improvement? And the litmus test is you look at the business model canvas, which is a quite well-known tool, right? So you describe your business model by saying, what's the value proposition, for whom the customer segment, how do we deliver that, how do we create that value, and what about costs and revenues, etc. So if you look up on Wikipedia, for instance, that business model canvas, you find 9 boxes in here. So customer segment is one box, the value proposition is another box, the partners that you work with is a third box, and so on and so forth. What I learned in my practice is that when you have sometimes two, definitely 3 or more boxes changed, then you speak about innovation with a capital I, right? Because the day-to-day business as usual, does not have the resources, does not have the mindset, think about uncertainty, does not have the tools in order to manage that kind of change in here. So this is where the innovators, the labs, the innovation centers, etc., come into play. And actually that could also be part of that dialogue between the business units and the innovation that I was referring to earlier, right? Look at what they have planned and doing a quick analysis on their plans, saying, is this an innovation with a small I or an innovation with a capital I? So what are the key assumptions? What are the biggest uncertainties? Definitely when there are 3 more in those 3 out of those 9 boxes, sometimes even 2, right? And then you need to go the innovation road.
Gracias, Brian. Hay varias preguntas similares en torno a la cultura. Y nos preguntan qué está pasando con estas tendencias en la cultura de innovación dentro de la organización. La innovación es transversal, en todos los departamentos debería existir ese representante de innovación o debería haber un departamento independiente que esté encargado de innovar dentro de la empresa.
Both. I think it's a mix, right? So if you really agree in your strategy dialogue, right, with the business units that there is a big opportunity out there, but there are tons of uncertainties, right? You need the experts, right? People in the early stages skilled in design thinking, right? Maybe at the later stage, being knowledgeable in how to create quick prototypes using AI tools like Cursor or Lovable or that kind of stuff, right? That's a central competence, right? But I mean, to make that impact, you also need people who have T-shaped people, if you will, who have some understanding of innovation and the need for experiments that create the proof points and how to run the experiments and how to win the customers for that. So I don't think it's that corporate innovation will completely be absorbed, if you will, by the day-to-day business. But you will find, I guess, more and more people who understand the innovation plus some central experts in here.
Ok, por temas de tiempo voy a unir 2 preguntas que nos hacen. Y Carlos nos pregunta cuáles son esas preguntas incómodas pero necesarias que los líderes deberían poner sobre la mesa cuando hablan de estrategia e innovación. Y cómo también la inteligencia artificial está en esas conversaciones, cómo la innovación se está volviendo más ágil y qué tiene que ver esta nueva transformación digital.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, AI is not a value proposition, right? It's not something that you make your customers happy, right? You do not make your customers happy if you say, well, we have a product, a little device, you just plug it into electricity and then it does its job. Electricity is not a value proposition. I think the answer is ambiguous. It's not be taken away by the potentials of the technology, But at the same time, AI makes it also easier to come up with ideas, crazy ideas that need to be tested, and to create early stage prototypes, right? So I think that the key to that is it increases the opportunity space, but at the same time it requires a lot of discipline to say we are not selling technology, we are not selling AI, we are selling a solution to a defined and validated customer problem, right? And obviously AI can come up with some synthetic personas and say these are the problems and the needs, right? But if you go out in the field, if you then speak with real potential customers, there's a lot of surprises there. Positive surprises.
Thank you. Así es, Frank. Bueno, el futuro se construye con las decisiones que tomamos hoy. Muchas gracias por compartir todas estas herramientas que nos permiten también pues, escalar la innovación dentro de las organizaciones. Y hay demasiadas preguntas que nos están haciendo en los chats, pero creo que una de ellas es muy relevante y las respuestas también se pueden encontrar ahí, que es dónde podemos conseguir tu libro.
I'm not sure about how the situation is in Colombia. Nicole, please provide the community with that. It's available on every physical store, bookstore, right, as well as obviously in digital form, right, in PDF or in ebooks, right. If you do not want to search in here, you can also go to the website leanscaleup.com, right, and there's a subpage book where you can download a free chapter and purchase the PDF. So tons of opportunities. It's everywhere.
Claro que sí, entonces
Thank you for
a todas
having me.
aquellas personas que se encuentran conectadas, vamos a enviarles un correo para que puedan acceder a esta información, al capítulo gratuito y vamos a revisar cómo podrán acceder también a la compra del mismo para que puedan explorar este material y puedan aprovechar toda la información. Frank, nuevamente, muchas gracias por unirte a la comunidad,
Thank
por
you.
compartir tu
Buenos
conocimiento.
días. Gracias.
Muchas
Bye.
gracias. Nos vemos. Bueno, y a las demás personas que aún están conectadas, les vamos a activar en este momento la encuesta que hacemos semanal para que nos ayuden a responderla. Perfecto, ya se encuentra activa. Les recomendamos responder especialmente esa pregunta que nos permite mapear qué temas de interés les gustaría que tengamos en nuestras próximas sesiones. Vamos a dejarles unos minutos para que puedan responderla. Y mientras lo responden, vamos a compartir los próximos eventos que tenemos dentro de la comunidad. En este momento se proyecta la imagen y como podrán ver, en mayo 14 vamos a estar con Diego Carrera Núñez hablando sobre la computación cuántica desde Perú. En mayo 21 vamos a tener los resultados del ranking de innovación 2026 de la ANDI. Para esto nos va a acompañar Daniel Mesa y Alejandro Olaya. En mayo 28 vamos a conocer los casos de éxito en innovación de los productos Ramo con Juan Pablo Molano. Y en junio 4 vamos a tener a la empresa más innovadora que será reconocida por la ANDI en este 2026. Así que los invitamos a conectarse, seguir aprendiendo, compartan los eventos y nos vemos en las próximas sesiones. Feliz día.